So, there's this guy named Jack. Growing up, Jack thought his family was just like everyone else in their quiet little town. They lived in a modest house, the kind with creaky floors and a roof that always needed patching up. His parents, Tom and Linda, were good people, humble, hardworking, and a bit strict when it came to spending. Jack would hear stories from his friends about fancy vacations to Disneyland or the latest gadgets they got for Christmas, and he'd just nod along, pretending that his summer at the local public pool was just as exciting. Jack's childhood was filled with simple joys. His parents always emphasized the value of $1. He had to earn his allowance, which wasn't much. Every Saturday morning, he'd wake up early to mow lawns around the neighborhood. He even picked up odd jobs like washing cars and running errands for elderly neighbors. Jack would proudly stash away his earnings in a glass jar he kept under his bed. It took him an entire year to save up for a secondhand bike, and when he finally bought it, the feeling was nothing short of pure triumph. He learned to budget that way, by necessity. If he wanted new shoes, he had to decide whether to dip into his savings or wait for a birthday. His parents never discouraged him from working, but they also never offered him more than what was necessary. Jack thought they were just frugal, always talking about how the cost of living was rising and how he should be careful with money. And Jack respected that, took it to heart, and grew up to be pretty good with managing what little he thought he had. When Jack went off to college, his parents sat him down for one of those serious talks. They explained that they could cover some of the tuition, but he'd need to find a job for the rest. "We can't afford to cover everything," his dad told him. Jack never questioned it. So he worked part-time jobs all through college, sometimes bartending late into the night, other times working at a bookstore. He became really good at making the most out of thrift store finds, eating ramen, and sharing a cramped apartment with roommates who were all in the same boat. Jack was proud of himself when he graduated without too much debt and with a decent job lined up. He knew the value of hard work, resilience, and living within his means. He didn't realize it then, but those lessons were going to become much more valuable than he ever imagined. After a few years of steady work, Jack managed to get a promotion at his job, which was a big deal for him. He decided to treat himself to a slightly nicer apartment, one with fewer leaks and an actual view of the skyline. He called his parents to tell them the good news, and they seemed genuinely proud, even if their enthusiasm was always a bit understated. Then came his 30th birthday. A milestone, right? His parents invited him back home, saying they had a special surprise for him. Jack figured it would be one of his mom's famous home-cooked meals, and maybe a nice cake. Little did he know, this birthday was going to change his life. When Jack walked into his childhood home, nothing seemed different. The same familiar smell of apple pie lingered in the air, the same old photos hung on the walls, and his dad was wearing his usual plaid shirt. They sat him down at the kitchen table, the way they used to when they wanted to have a serious family conversation. Jack wondered if he was in some kind of trouble. Maybe they found out about that parking ticket he never mentioned. His mom cleared her throat, her voice gentle but firm, like she was about to read him a bedtime story. "Jack, there's something we've been wanting to tell you for a long time." Jack's heart skipped a beat. Were they sick? Was there some long-lost family secret he was about to hear? His mind raced through all sorts of possibilities, but none of them prepared him for what came next. "We're rich," his dad said, just like that, like he was announcing what they were having for dinner. Jack blinked, waiting for the punchline, but his parents were staring at him, serious as ever. He laughed awkwardly, thinking it was some kind of joke. "Yeah, right, and I'm the King of England." His mom shook her head and slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, bank statements, property deeds, stock portfolios, all in his parents' names. Jack stared at them, feeling like he was reading a language he'd never learned. His parents had investments all over the world, properties he'd never heard of, and a bank account with so many zeros, it looked like a typo. "We've been living like this for a long time, Jack," his dad continued, "but we wanted to raise you without this hanging over your head." Jack just sat there, speechless. It was like his entire life was a movie, and he had just reached the plot twist. His parents went on to explain that they had both come from wealthy families, but decided to live humbly to teach Jack the value of hard work and money. They didn't want him to grow up spoiled or entitled, and they feared that a life of luxury might rob him of the sense of satisfaction that comes from earning things on your own. But why now? Jack finally managed to ask, still trying to wrap his mind around this bombshell. His mom smiled warmly, reaching over to place a hand on his. "Because you've proven that you can manage on your own. You've earned everything without knowing about this, and we're so proud of you. Now, we want you to have the freedom to use what we've saved up in a way that you think is right." The next few days were a blur. Jack had a million questions about their investments, about why they chose to live the way they did, and about what they expected him to do now. His parents told him there was no pressure to change his life. The money was there if he needed it, but it wasn't an obligation. Jack spent a lot of time reflecting. He thought back to his years of struggling, to all those odd jobs and sacrifices. And then it hit him. He wouldn't trade any of it. The feeling of earning his first paycheck, the pride of buying his own bike, the lessons he'd learned about budgeting and saving, all of those experiences had shaped him into the person he was. And now, with this new knowledge, he felt like he could take on the world. He decided to keep living simply, at least for a while. But now, he had the power to help others in ways he never thought possible. Jack started using some of the money to create scholarships for kids who came from humble backgrounds, like he thought he did. And he even set up a fund for local businesses in his hometown. He invested wisely, but he never lost that frugal mindset his parents had instilled in him. It wasn't about the money. It was about what he could do with it. Jack realized that his parents had given him the greatest gift, not wealth, but the understanding of how to live well without it. And now, he could do so much more, knowing he had a safety net he'd never expected. As he sat with his parents one evening, overlooking the same yard where he used to mow the lawn for a few bucks, Jack felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the money, but for the journey. And he knew that no matter what he chose to do next, he would never forget the lessons he'd learned along the way.